This presentation is about building Burp extensions with Kotlin. How many people here use Burp Suite on a regular basis? Awesome, okay. So the idea for this talk came after interacting with other Portswigger Discord moderators. One of them in particular was really encouraging all of us to try Kotlin. A lot of us resisted because we've built tons of Burp extensions with Java. We didn't need another programming language to learn. And I mean, what's so great about Kotlin? It can't be that great. He persisted, wore us down, and one by one, several of us tried it and reported back, man, this is awesome. I'm having a lot of fun using Kotlin. So eventually I tried it, came to the same conclusion. Years ago, I did a bunch of Ruby on Rails, and if anybody's done that, something about it is just fun. It's fun to write Ruby on Rails applications. Well, I found that fun when building Burp extensions with Kotlin. And so I wanted to share that excitement with you all. And then I also wanted to address a problem that I heard other pen testers say. A lot of them say, I'm doing an assessment, I don't have time to slow down and build an extension. I don't know how long it's going to take me. What if it takes me a whole day? That's one day less I have to pen test. The problem with that is they're in Burp Repeater, they're copying things out of Repeater, they're pasting it into this console app, they're copying that out, pasting into this other app, and then doing some transformations, putting it back in Repeater over and over again, and it sucks the joy out of it. It hurts the breadth and depth of testing, and if you could do it natively right in Burp Suite, solve that problem right there, man, you could get a lot done. And so I wanted to address that by creating this presentation, and then I have 3 things that I'm releasing to you guys today. One of them is a generalized template for building Burp extensions in Kotlin. You can pull it up, clone the GitHub repository, and open it up in IntelliJ and just get started. You don't have to worry about the Gradle settings and plumbing and all that kind of stuff. It just works. The second thing I'm releasing is some problem solution example extensions. So if you're that pen tester and you just need to get that login thing to work that the session macros can't do all by itself, then you can pull up one of my demo plugins, strip out just a tiny bit of code, and make it do exactly the thing you need it to do without wrestling with all the rest. Kind of like a more advanced, like a further along template for the common things everybody has trouble with. And then last, I have a library I'm releasing that helps you easily persist settings to the project file or Burp's preferences and automatically create a user interface for editing those settings. You don't have to play with swing layouts. You don't have to style anything or worry about the colors or the font or how many columns you want on that swing layout. It just simply makes a UI for you. You don't have to do anything. So let's get started. First, I'm an app pen tester. I've been doing it for 18 years. I work for Virtue Security, an app, network, and cloud pen testing company. And then I'm also one of the moderators for the Portswigger Discord. That's a place you all can go, anyone can join and talk about building Burp extensions, using Bambdas, writing B-checks, or just talking about app pen testing. Everyone is welcome to join that. And the link to that is on this slide and it'll also be at the end of the presentation. And also, I'm an extension author. I have a bunch of extensions I've written for myself on my GitHub, and then I have one in the BAP store. So actually, for time's sake, we're going to skip this. There's lots of options for extensibility. Some are faster than others. Extensions are the slowest. We're going to focus on Montoya API. It's the one you should use. I'm going to shave some time off because of our technical difficulties. So Burp extensions can be built in Java using the Montoya API. They can't necessarily be built in Kotlin as far as we know, right? We haven't talked about Kotlin. On this slide, the old ones could be built with Java, Jython, JRuby. The new one can be built in Java. Nobody said anything about Kotlin yet. So how is it that we can build a burping station in Kotlin when it's supposed to be in Java? First, I think we need to talk about what Kotlin is. So Kotlin is a different programming language. It's built by JetBrains. It's open source. It is the language of choice for building Android applications. So anyone who's newly getting into Android app development probably is using Kotlin. But the key thing is it's fully compatible with Java. And there's 2 things I'm going to focus on for that. First, when you build a Kotlin project, it could be a Burp extension, could be standalone console app, it's going to build it into Java class files and jar files. That's why we can use it with Burp Suite. Burp Suite accepts a jar file for an extension, and we can build a jar file with Kotlin. Second, Kotlin will let you use Java standard library, Kotlin standard library, Java libraries from Maven Central, Kotlin libraries from Maven Central. It doesn't matter. You can use any of those libraries, mix and match. You don't have to learn a whole bunch of new libraries. You just use whichever one makes the most sense. And then what's different about Kotlin? Really, it's just more fun to use. It's concise, it's efficient. There's a number of things in the slide that I'm going to skip through for time's sake that just make it a lot more fun. It gives you some things that Java doesn't yet have. Many of these things will show up in Java. Maybe in like 25, Java 25 or something like that. It'll be a little bit, some of these are kind of in preview, but Java doesn't have all these things yet. So in the end, I just love Kotlin. It makes me find excuses to build extensions rather than only building extensions when I have to. So we are actually going to talk about a little tiny bit of syntax, and then we're going to jump into demos. This is going to be just enough to read along with the code. So if you're familiar with Java, Kotlin is just a little bit different. So we're going to talk about functions, classes, and declaring variables. So for functions, you start with the fun keyword, you give it a name, and it follows, or the parameters start with the name of the parameter, a colon followed by its type. And then the return type for the function actually follows that with a colon. Yes.
The slides aren't working on the...
Yes, it's because we had a bunch of technical difficulties. It's like hardly working as it is. It's presenting over Zoom, basically, or Google Meet.
Are you recording Zoom?
Can
you do that so I can have it for afterwards?
You can see if you can do that on that one. That one's the one doing it. Anyway, so you have option of using a statement as the kind of the body of the function, or you can have a more traditional one where you have a bunch of logic and some return statements and things like that. There's two different options. And then classes, they look similar at first until you look at the top line and see that there's a constructor argument in there. That's a little bit weird. So you can declare a class with the class keyword, give it a name, and then your constructor arguments can go right in the very top. So in this case, we have a constructor argument called radius that is of type double. And this is actually doing more than just declaring a constructor argument. It's actually an implicit constructor that assigns a variable or a value to radius, and radius is a property instead of a class instance variable like it would be in Java. So we get an automatic getter and setter that we can just declare both of them public, both of them private, or some combination of public and private. Inside the body of the class, we also have a private property called pi. It's of type double, has a value of 3.14. And then we have a statement circumference in there. Oops. When we declare, or when we create a class, we don't have to use the keyword new. We just say circle and pass in the radius. Look at what time it is. For variable declarations, there's a couple things to know. So in Kotlin, you cannot assign null to a variable unless you declare it nullable. So the var my favorite drink and val my name cannot hold the value null because it's not nullable. Var keyword declares a variable that whose value or reference can change. So I can say my favorite drink is of type string and it's coffee, and I can change my mind and say no, it's tea. Tea is my favorite drink. But up top, notice the slight change of val versus var. Val my name equals Nick. That value cannot actually change. So when you declare a variable as a val keyword, some people would say it's read-only. Some people would call it immutable. I don't like any of those terms. I think they're confusing. What I would say is when you declare something val, you're saying that the reference to the object it points to cannot change. And the reason this is important is if we go to the previous slide, val small circle cannot change what reference of circle it's referencing, but the var radius double at the top, it has a public getter and setter. We can change its radius. So the whole thing is not immutable. The reference to the object simply cannot be changed. So that's important. Last, the var where am I has a string with a question mark after it. We're declaring it nullable. C# has this, but I don't think Java does currently. I think you have to use optionals. So you can declare it nullable, and then you can assign a null value to it. But the compiler is really picky. It knows whether you checked for null. If you did not check for null, it will not compile. And so because of that, they've added a couple extra helper functions to make it easier to check for null and handle null. So on the bottom line where it says where am I question mark, this is called the safe call operator. It's like an implicit if then. If where am I is not null, call dot uppercase. If it is null, don't really do anything at all. And then you have a second option, the Elvis operator, question mark colon says, hey, if the thing on the left is null, substitute the thing on the right instead. So if we run this, we get Nick drinks tea in nowhere because the where am I starts out as null, and we get our default nowhere. Okay, let's go to demos, see how far we can get in the time we have. So I reference a GitHub repository. I have a link to this at the end. You can clone this repository. I'm going to walk through how the pieces work so that you're informed and you can actually understand what's happening and tinker with it, but know that all the hard work is actually already done. So we're going to go to IntelliJ. Let's see, base. Okay. So when you clone this repository, it's going to look just like this. I'm going to walk through Gradle. I'm going to walk through the class file, and I'm going to walk through building the extension and adding it to Burp Suite so that you can understand that. So first, we're going to use Gradle as the build tool. Gradle is going to do a couple things. It builds our project into a jar file. But second, it goes out to Maven Central or potentially other repositories, and it gets Java and Kotlin libraries, downloads them, and then makes them available to us in our application. So when you clone this repository, the only things you need to worry about is rename your root project here in the settings.gradle.kts file. You're going to open the build.gradle.kts file, and I don't have a page up. Couple things in here. There's a Kotlin version number, which I actually need to increment as of, I think, yesterday. And then there's a ShadowJar plugin. This is critical that we use the ShadowJar plugin or something like it, because we're going to build a jar file, and that jar file has to include the Kotlin libraries. It also has to include everything that we included from Maven Central or some other repository. If you try to do it without that, Burp Suite will load your jar file and say, hey, I can't find that class, and it'll just have an exception and nothing will happen. So you have to include your dependencies, and that's what the ShadowJar plugin is doing for you. When you clone this, you'll maybe change your package name reference, you'll change your version number. Down here in dependencies, this implementation line is a reference to the Burp Montoya API. I can't tell how well you guys can see that. And it's your gateway into interacting with Burp Suite. This is how you can start interacting with repeater or proxy history or things like that and get to what you need to get to. Finally, at the bottom, we're going to tell it we want to target JDK version 21 because that's what Burp Stable is at right now. And JDK 21 is where we get virtual threads, which is used in one of the other projects. So when you build your plugin, you're going to come over here to the elephant symbol on the right. There's going to be a sort of a refresh looking button. If you change your Gradle files, you need to hit this refresh button. It's going to go through, it's going to re-download the dependencies if they've changed, make sure everything's set up correctly, and make sure it works. After that, you double click on the ShadowJar application, and it's going to build you your jar file that you can load into Burp Suite. That file is kind of tricky to find if you don't know what you're looking for. It is going to end up in build, libs, and then you're going to have a couple files here. You want the one with the -all. So the ShadowJar, the one with all the dependencies, is going to have -all. To then load that into Burp Suite, we're going to go over to extensions, add, choose Java, select file. We're going to go to that same directory and choose the -all jar file and load it. I've already done that, so I'm going to show you where that's at. So at the very bottom, we have your plugin name here. That's the name of our plugin at the moment. And then we have an output, so kind of like a console log location, and then we have like a standard error location. Two places to look at when your plugin loads to see if it's working correctly. I do want you to notice this started loading the extension here and the finished loading the extension here. We're going to come back to this in our code here in a little bit. It's actually pretty important. It'll save you tons of time later. So how does Burp Suite know how to load your extension? We built a jar file. There's probably a class file. What is it looking for? What is it doing? If we look at our source code under source main Kotlin, and then it's your Kotlin extension here, which you can actually rename by going right-click, refactor, and then rename, change it to whatever you want. If we look at this code, what it's looking for is it's going to stop the first time it comes to a class that implements the Burp extension interface. That's how it knows that it's found your plugin. And if we control-click on that, we can see that the interface it's looking for is we need to provide an initialize function in order for this to work. Burp Suite is going to instantiate our class and then call initialize. That's all that's going to happen. So in the initialize function, a couple things we need to do. The Montoya API argument that comes through is nullable because Burp Suite's built in Java and we're writing in Kotlin. We need to handle that. So one thing I'll kind of demonstrate if I do not handle that, we're actually going to get a bunch of compilation errors saying, hey, you forgot to check for null. So kind of just rounding that out. We could do an if then here. We could do a couple different things. We're going to use a function called require not null built into Kotlin that just says, hey, if I get something that actually has a null value, we're going to throw an illegal argument exception. Because if we get a Montoya API argument and it really is null, we're just going to freak out because something has gone horribly wrong and we really don't care what else happens after that. So it's going to check for null for the API parameter. It knows that we've checked for null and that an exception will be thrown if it had null. So now we can use it as if it wasn't null from here on out. So we're assigning it to a property, which I'll show you in a second, but this API one right here is actually referring to the API that was passed into the function. Now, as you build more extensions, you're going to have more functions. They're going to need to be able to get to this API parameter. We need to save it as a property, or you would think of it in Java as like a class instance variable, but a property is actually something different. So we need to assign it to a property. That's up here. We have a private var API of type Montoya API. That's where we're going to interact when we need to do something with Burp Suite. And in this kind of blank template, there's not a whole lot else in here. There's some logging statements. Oops, I forgot the one at the top. You remember seeing in the output window, started loading burp extensions. This is how we log to the burp extension. We'd put all the code that we want to initialize things after that point and before we get to finish loading the extension. This is critical because Burp Suite is obfuscated and it does a lot of weird things, and sometimes what it does is it has an exception and it swallows the exception and it doesn't tell you about it. And so then you spend 4 hours trying to figure out why your extension isn't working properly when really it's some weird thing about just loading the class, and it never even got to half your code. If you look at, as it loads, if you look at that loading the extension and finish loading the extension, you can save yourself tons of time, because if you don't see finish loading the extension, you've messed up something at the very beginning, and you don't even have to look at any of the other classes, any of the files you created. Last thing we'll do on this kind of blank template is we're going to give it a name. We just say API.extension.setName and give it some kind of name here. When building the extensions, one critical thing that seems hard to people at first is debugging. You can always log things to the console, pass some variables in there, but it would be better if you could do interactive debugging just like you would with any Java or Kotlin application. And with Burp Suite, you can do that. It's actually pretty easy. So I do not want to talk. Let's see. Hang on. Go away, a little tab. Where is Visual Studio Code? So to do that, you would go to the user.vm options file in your Burp Suite extension folder, and this is on the README, so nobody has to copy this down or anything. You just add this line and say, hey, listen for a remote debugger on, or actually it's a local debugger on port 8700 when you start up. And when you do that, if I can Alt-Tab, go back to, nope, that's not the right one. And I have to minimize the shoot. So then you can go up to run and then attach to process. So come up and say, hey, there's one running on port 8700. Connect to it, debugger tools pop up, and then you can code to your extension and control click it. And you're going to hit the breakpoint. Now you can step into, step over, step out. You can look at variables. You can modify variables. Everything that you're used to doing with a Java debugger, it's going to work in here. So this is great. We have kind of a blank template. What does a real extension look like? One that solves a specific problem. 935. Okay. We're going to look at one that is addressed at session management. So we're going to use OWASP Juice Shop as an example, and we're going to pretend that we're testing an application that uses a JOT token. OWASP Juice Shop is going to do that. And in this case, depending on which part of OWASP Juice Shop you're interacting with, it's going to expect the token in a different location. So some parts of OWASP Juice Shop expect it as an authorization bearer header. That looks like that one down there. Other parts of the API for OWASP Juice Shop actually want it as a cookie called token. And so you need, as a pen tester, when you're using repeater, intruder, scanner, whatever you're using, you want to be able to automatically have the right JOT token in there all the time so that you don't have to worry about it. So the typical approach is, well, I'll go and I'll log in, I'll submit a username and password, and then I'll get back a JOT token. It's in the body, I'll copy this, and then I'll paste it to each of my repeater tabs, and we'll have a really tough time just getting a whole lot done because we're mostly just copying and pasting. We're not really even doing a whole lot of testing. So the step up from this, actually go to slides to help with that. The solution to this is session handling rules. So we're not even using an extension yet. And remember, sometimes using some of these other options are much faster. If we have a static JOT token that's good for 8 hours, that doesn't ever expire and doesn't get invalidated when we mess something up, we should just use a session handling rule. And that session handling rule says, hey, for every request you send, let's just append an authorization bearer token and we'll paste in the current token. And let's append a token cookie and paste in the current JOT token. And as long as it's still good for 8 hours, man, you can scan overnight, you can use repeater, you can use intruder, you're kind of done. You don't need an extension at this point. But what happens if, like I see in a lot of my assessments, that JOT token is only good for 2 minutes? And now you have to go to that session handling rule and paste in the new JOT every 2 to 3 minutes. It starts getting really annoying because there's extra clicks to get into the session handling rules and stuff like that. It's no fun. So we need a solution that will do the following. When we send a request, we want it to append the current JOT token to the token cookie and to the authorization bearer header automatically for us. We want it to send that request, and if we get back a 401 unauthorized, we know that the 2 minutes is up. We need to get a new one. So we need to then automatically log in, scrape the new JOT token, cache it for future requests, and apply it to the original request and resend it, okay? That's our goal here. Has anybody experienced this kind of trouble? I see a couple hands, especially with scanner. Yeah, it's great to like be mostly done with your assessment and go, okay, I'll get scanner, go, and set it up, and then like go to sleep and come back and, hey, you stayed logged in. This is awesome. And there's some actual findings. So we need to build an extension to do this. We are going to still use session handling rules. We're not going to circumvent the things that are so easy to use. We're going to augment them. And Burp Suite, when it's just cookies, could do this all by itself. But when we have an authorization bearer token and we have cookies, it cannot do that by itself. So we need to help it. So we have 2 session handling rules. We have, that's a little small. On the top, there's one that says, just run my extension. In this case, what's happening is if we have a valid JOT token, we're simply applying it to the current request. That's all it's doing. It has a cache token, it's going to apply it. Burp Suite's going to send the request. But what if we do not have a valid JOT token? If we get back a 401 unauthorized, we're going to use a check session as valid session handling rule. And we can define some rules that say, hey, in the HTTP header, if 401 comes back, you're not logged in. And then you have a couple options for what to do about it. One of those is to issue a login macro, one that you've recorded. It's basically that login, username, password, get back a JOT token in the body. So we're going to use that, and then we're going to say, after you do that login thing, talk to my extension again. And the extension's job is going to be find the JOT token, strip it out, cache it, and then reapply it to the request, and then it'll automatically get sent by the session handling rule. So that's what we're going to write. I'm going to check my time. 10:40. Nice. So the top. So this is starting from the same extension template. And I need to zoom in. Shift Alt plus. Hopefully that's decently big. So same template. We're going to start in the initialize function. In here, we need to tell Burp, hey, I have a session handling rule for you. I have an extension that's going to do something for session handling. To do that, we come down here and we say API to HTTP, register session handling action, and point it at this class. This class is going to satisfy the interface for doing a session handling rule. So we go up, we have to implement the session handling interface here. Click on it if I can. We need to provide a name function and a perform action function. Pretty simple. Page down. So name function is easy. We just give it a string, whatever we want to call it. In the drop down where we select our extension, this is just what's going to appear. But the perform action function is a little bit harder. This has 2 purposes. We need to apply the JOT token when we have a valid one, and we need to scrape the latest JOT token when we have a login macro. We're going to look at scraping the JOT token first. Okay? So when we have a Burp Suite call the perform action function, if it tried to log in, there's going to be requests and responses in the action data.macro request response object. It's going to be a list of requests. We're going to iterate through each of the responses looking for that JOT token. So this code, basically it goes through each one and it applies a regex pattern with a match group. I click on this at the top. It has a regex pattern looking for token, colon, and then quotation marks. And we have the parentheses as a capture group. Anything in between the parentheses inside the quotation marks, we're going to be able to pull out of that regex result. So if we go down, that's what this matcher group is all about. We're going to grab the first thing we match, and we're going to cache it in this property, this access token property at the top, which is a string. So what I want to kind of point out is when you're building your burp extension, when your application works slightly different but real similar problem, this is kind of more the starting point you might want to come to when you're trying to do something similar, slightly different custom code. All right, so we extract out the JOT token, we cache it in the access token property, and what about applying the access token to the current request? So in this case, we're going to check to see if we have a current access token. Some of this Kotlin syntax checks for null, and then it says basically we're going to call that thing it. So when you see it on here, it's talking about access token. If you don't give it a name, its default is it. So if we have an access token, we're going to take the current request, and we're going to call add or update header and give it an authorization bearer header with the token here, and we're going to give it a token with the JOT there. One thing I'd like to point out, but I'm not going to spend as much time as I hoped, is this is actually a extension function. This add or update header or add or update cookie does not exist in the Montoya API, even though I'm operating on that function. I actually used Kotlin to create my own function on a class that I do not own, that is in an external library. So it acts as if it's always been there, like Portswigger originally put that in there, but it didn't. I'm addressing a particular problem I have where if you try to update a parameter or update a cookie that does not exist, nothing happens. You have to check to see if it exists. If it does not, you have to call add or add header or add cookie. If it does exist, you can update it. So I didn't want to duplicate that code, so I created an extension function, which is one of the fun features of Kotlin. Okay, so we're going to add or update those headers. And then we basically return the modified request to Burp Suite. It's going to reissue the request for us with the updated cookie and updated bearer token, and it's going to work. Let's see if it works in this case. Make sure it's off right now. Yeah. So first I'm going to show you it not working. I'm going to kind of mess up the token. All right, if I send it, it's going to come back 401 unauthorized. If I turn on the session handling rule, and actually I'm going to open Session Tracer just to show that. It's tiny. So if we try it again, hit send, it's going to actually log in, takes a little bit longer, and then we're going to have a success. It's going to fill out our JOT token. We're going to get back a body to the response for that API user endpoint. If you ever needed to debug this, there's a session tracing tool where it actually steps through step by step what's happening. Here it says we got a 401 authorized. We need to do the login macro, and then we pass it to your extension. So if you build these things for session handling rules, open Session Tracer, watch what's happening in that plugin. Okay, I do not have that much time left. Let's get to the magic user interface thing that I'm going to show you. Git, checkout, master. Got it, okay. So this plugin is awesome, except for you're going to have to hard code some stuff for every project you do. And then you have to keep track of that jar file or that source code, and you have to make sure you don't get it lost. And then in a year from now, when they ask you to retest or do the assessment over, you got to find it. And that's not super great. We want to be able to reuse this plugin. We want to not have to remember the settings. We want it to just work in a year, or when we pass it off to a coworker and they do the assessment, we want it to just work. And so to do that, we need to make this configurable. And in Burp Suite, if you've ever done anything with settings or UI, it's actually, who's done like a JPanel UI thing with a Burp extension? Nobody knows that pain. It's terrible. You got to do all the swing stuff all by yourself. Has anybody done swing UI stuff, just not even in Burp Suite? Are there? How painful is it? Yeah. Yeah. If you did it once and then a year passes, do you remember how to do it? No. No, you have no idea. Yeah, same problem. So we don't want to fuss with that. So what I've created is a library that does that for you. And I'm going to demonstrate it first, show you the code second. So if I right click on here and go to extensions, Jot token handler, settings, we get a UI that pops up. We can name the header we want the Jot token to appear in. We can include a prefix in front of that, like bearer, or I've seen some that are Jot or some that don't have a prefix at all. Lots of crazy things happen. We can redefine our regex pattern with our match group, so we can match something other than token colon. We can do access underscore token, access dash token, access token with a capital T. All those I've seen in different assessments. And we can scrape out that Jot token. And then we can, this says header here, I gotta fix that, but we can name the cookie as well. When we hit save, it's saving the settings to the project file. So if I open the project file in a year from now, I have the same settings. They do not go away. They travel with the project file. Hand the project file to a coworker, it just works. So how does this work? If you wanted to use this library, scroll back up, how hard is it to actually really use? What I've done is first, I've declared some properties without initializing them at the very top. And there are Boolean, there's strings, there's list of strings, there's a couple things. But first we just declare the properties. So I have a cookie name setting, I have a header name setting. When we get to the initialize function, we then instantiate them. So we say, hey, I have a string extension, I'm gonna pass it the Montoya API, I'll give it a name, I'll give it kind of a key for storage, what is the name of the storage location for it. I'm gonna give it a default value, and I'm gonna say, do I wanna store it in the project file or in Burp's preferences? And then I just repeat that for each of the settings. So that's not a big deal, especially considering Swing. How do we generate the UI? Basically, I create a list of the settings. I pass that list of settings to a form generator. The form generator builds a form builder, and you call .run, and you have a settings form, you have a UI. This code alone will cause that UI to pop up. If we want to get to it through a right-click context menu, you then add a register context menu item provider and pass it this class from the library. So you're not having to implement this, you're just giving it the settings form and saying, here's a context menu. And then we actually have an unload handler because you actually have to clean out Swing interfaces even if you completely unload your extension. The Swing UI actually stays, which was a fun discovery. It does not clean up after itself, so you have to clean up after it. So this is the entirety of the settings or the code for setting up the settings, okay? We didn't do any Swing layouts. We didn't say how many columns we wanted. We didn't have to like locate them on the left or the right or do anything crazy. This is it, and it generated UI for us. And as we go down to actually use it, it's, again, not that much different. So we still have a regular expression, for example. Right here, access token pattern setting dot current value. All we're gonna do is access the setting and say dot current value. That's how we're gonna get to all our different settings and use it in our plugin. And now we have a configurable extension we can reuse over and over again. We can take it to different projects. The settings stay with the project, and we're just gonna get more work done. And we're gonna have fun doing it. So I have, go back to Firefox. I have a whole bunch more of these down here to explore. So these are actually 4 demos that I was actually hoping to do. I got through one. And then a link to the library. This is all in that template spot on GitHub. And so it's something that you guys can check out. Let me go back to the presentation for a moment. So there's a link to that template, which then links to all the other stuff we talked about. There's also these resources for learning Kotlin and Montoya API. Link to the Portswigger Discord if you guys want to join. And then, yeah, just reach out on LinkedIn if you try some of this stuff and tell me about your experience, add issues to the GitHub, and things like that. So stop here, see if you guys have any questions. Depending on time, and if there are no questions, I might show you guys Bambas. I know I have 5 minutes. We'll just do questions. So anybody have any questions? Yeah, so are there any performance improvements by using Kotlin? What I specifically noticed is, for the most part, no, but because you can use coroutines with async await, you can do file I/O stuff faster. So I have an extension I wrote because a client handed me text files of HTTP requests, and I needed to get 100 of them into Repeater. And so that was not super fun. And so I wrote an extension to point at the file, and it would open each text file, and it would load it in Repeater, but it would use async await to do that. And it loaded in like 5 seconds with async await, but with just not standard blocking I/O. I think I Control-Delete, in task at some point and gave up on that. So in that sense, yes, there's more options. What's that?
You effectively benchmarked with them, right?
Have I benchmarked it?
You did like a comparative
At least with using async await, yeah, or using virtual threads with JVM21. So if anyone's interested in talking more about building burp extensions or about any of the presentation, I'm going to be around afterwards, right outside this door. Feel free to come find me. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your talks you're going to.